China's trade surplus with the U.S. widening to a record $31 billion. The China-U.S. surplus rising nearly 15% so far this year. These numbers could add fuel to the trade war that is brewing between Washington and Beijing. Let's bring in now Mattie Duppler, Senior Fellow at the National Taxpayers Union. Mattie, we appreciate you joining us so, I would say bright and early, but anything rainy and early on this Monday morning.
Exactly right.
Yeah, this is a story that requires, I think, some kind of a three-dimensional chessboard to follow the trade fight. Where exactly, from a taxpayer union standpoint, where do we stand at the moment?
Well, it's an interesting question, Brian, because right now this week we've had a lot of movement on the trade front. Now, like you said, in China, last week we had not one but two threats from the president about increasing tariffs on Chinese products. You know, that $200 billion tranche, the period for comment on that ended last week. So now the administration is essentially free to exert new tariffs anytime now. But the president also said that he'd be willing to exert another $267 billion of tariffs on Chinese products, essentially increasing tariffs on every import to the United States from China. Now, this will increase prices for consumers. Taxes are tariffs at the border. That means Americans pay them. The question, or the argument, that other companies across the world pay tariffs is simply not true. And we're starting to see some of that. You know, the question earlier about Apple and what they're going to do if they were to try to make the iPhone here. It increases prices to not only coerce companies to make products here that they don't have the capacity to do so, but ultimately increasing the inputs for any product that is made here is going to increase the cost for consumers.
But, you know, and I've seen some erroneous headlines. I'm not calling out anybody else in the media, but I have seen some erroneous and even confusing headlines from major media publications. We do need to make it clear, do we not, that this is not $267 billion in tariffs. This is the potential for 10% to 25%. Correct. On $250 to $267 billion. So you're looking for a numerative impact of $12 billion or so to $25 to $30 billion. It's not $267 billion in tariffs.
That's true, Brian, and I appreciate you making that distinction, but at the end of the day, the argument is the same. That makes prices rise for consumers. And remember, we're now only a month and a half, 2 months away from the midterms, and what voters did to bring Donald Trump to the White House was say, listen, our economic circumstances aren't changing. We don't feel any better off than we have been, even though the recovery has been happening for a couple years. Increasing prices on consumers, where Americans feel it in their checkbook most, is certainly going to change that equation. So regardless of the fact that we've removed a lot of barriers in the economy, thanks to tax reform and deregulation, if prices increase and Americans feel like their purchasing power has diminished, that's certainly going to show up in how they feel about their own economic circumstances.
I do wonder, though, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania effectively delivered the presidency to President Trump. Those states have been whacked, of course, over the last 30 years or so, losing manufacturing. Is this story, the tariff story, playing out well in those states? I don't know.
I think that, again, Americans vote with how they feel about their checkbooks, not just voting with their checkbooks. So that means, what is it doing to those industries in those states? You know, I'm from Wisconsin, so the Foxconn story, of course, is one that we have been following closely and looking at inputs for the iPhone. That's something that's going to impact not only the tech sector here in the United States and in those Rust Belt states, but obviously ag is taking a big hit as well. So Americans...
But, okay, Mattie, I did not know that about... I live in Wisconsin for part of the year. I am a Wisconsin taxpayer.
Go Pack!
So, so you know as well as I do that there is still a lot of pro-Trump sentiment in the same counties that delivered him the presidency. You and I probably still talk to the same people.
That's certainly true, and I think that'll be an interesting question in November. Then, what does that mean for voters? Do they still trust the president to have their best interests in heart? Now, we know that there are a lot of advisors that have the president's ear who can give him that good advice. Your former colleague Larry Kudlow this last week said that there's always a good time to start good trade policy, so I'm hoping that that continues now, especially when we're closing in on the midterms. We see Trump start to release the brake on these tariffs and these bad trade actions, and allows the economy to continue to prosper, and Americans and Wisconsin voters will feel the effect.
We'll find out. By the way, you didn't write that op-ed, did you? I'm just crossing everybody off the list. We're just going to process stuff. Mattie, I'm kidding. Mattie Duppler, the National Taxpayers Union. Have a great week. Thanks for joining us here on Worldwide Exchange. All right, see you soon.
Go Pack.
You got to get to Wisconsin in. All right, still ahead. Oil is on deck. Economic sanctions and now new fighting in Iraq. The big story. Oil is on the move. The great